Cargo library.
You're listening to the Cargo Library,
where cargo professionals learn how it really works. From supply chain moves to smart procurement, claims on the table, underwriting calls, customs at the border, trade finance, freight forwarders.
This is the Cargo Library, where the world of freight finally makes sense.
Cargo library.
Learn how it really works.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we take the complexity of specialized knowledge and distill it into the kind of critical insight that makes you the most informed person in the room.
That's right.
And if your world intersects with global trade, customs compliance, or, complex logistics, you absolutely know that the harmonized system, the HS codes, is the mandatory legal operating language of the world economy.
And it's a language where a single mistake can be incredibly costly. I mean, while many people assume HS classification is just a bureaucratic exercise in, getting the name right, getting it wrong is perhaps the single most expensive and operationally disruptive mistake an importer can make.
So today we are undertaking a crucial deep dive. This is designed specifically for high-level import managers, freight forwarders, and customs brokers. We've pulled the profiles for 11 products that consistently trip up even the most seasoned professionals, leading to some really costly audit failures.
And our mission here is not just to memorize 11 codes. That's the easy part. The real mission is to dissect the fundamental legal principles that govern their placement. We want to show you how customs officers actually interpret the legal text of the harmonized system based on the World Customs Organization framework. This is about thinking like the auditor.
And the stakes, they couldn't be higher.
Not at all. Misclassification doesn't just result in a minor fine. It leads directly to massive audits, sometimes spanning 5, even 7 years. And that results in significant financial penalties, retroactive duty bills, and just catastrophic supply chain delays. We're talking about the difference between streamlined operations and, frankly, operational paralysis.
And the problem, as you've pointed out before, is that the intuitive code is so often the wrong code. We want to classify based on what a product is called, but the HS uses this structured legal framework based on 3 pillars. Could you just quickly remind us what those are?
Absolutely. So classification really boils down to 3 things. First, the product's essential function or its intended use.
What it's really for.
Exactly. Second, the material it is primarily made of. And third, and this is the one that trips almost everyone up, the specific legal notes embedded in the sections and chapters.
Okay.
The entire system is governed by what we call the General Rules of Interpretation, or GRIs. And when we look at these 11 confused codes, the mistake nearly always involves prioritizing intuition over the mandatory legal notes and the product's essential character.
That's the tension we need to resolve today. We see items that are primarily electrical landing in the transport section, or complex machinery ending up in categories typically reserved for, say, precision instruments. We have to look past the product's marketing description and follow the legal hierarchy.
Precisely. So let's just jump right into our first segment. Here we're going to look at some large items that are defined by their movement, which forces them into section 7, often counterintuitively. We're calling this one function versus transport.
All right, let's start with a massive one. Tractors. We're talking specifically about agricultural tractors. The HS code is 8701. Now, when I see a modern tractor, I see a monstrously powerful machine. It's filled with complex hydraulics, powerful PTOs, power takeoffs, and sophisticated mechanical systems designed to power attachments. So logically, my first thought is section XI machinery and mechanical appliances.
And that is the most common, logical, and yet completely costly mistake.
Okay.
You are focusing correctly on its internal mechanical complexity. But classification isn't about complexity, it's about scope. Tractors are classified in section 7, which is for vehicles, aircraft, and vessels under HS code 8701.
I understand the vehicle argument, but surely the bulk of its work is done through stationary power or maybe low-speed application, tilling, harvesting, moving earth with hydraulic power. If classification relies on essential character, which is GRI 3B, how does the transport function override the machinery function?
That override is dictated by the scope of Chapter 87 and by General Rule of Interpretation 1, GRI 1.
The first rule.
The first and most important rule. And GRI 1 dictates that classification has to be determined according to the terms of the headings and any relative section or chapter notes. Chapter 87 is for vehicles, specifically tractors, other than some very specific ones. Customs classifies them based on their primary role in mode of transport in agriculture.
Let's talk with that legal distinction. If I'm an importer and I'm challenged on using 8701 versus a code in Chapter 84 for general machinery, what is the definitive boundary? Where's the line?
The definitive boundary lies in the vehicle's design for propulsion versus its design for, let's say, integral specific industrial work. If a machine is self-propelled but its primary function is not transportation, think of a massive purpose-built excavator or a bulldozer. It usually lands in Chapter 84.
Earth-moving machinery.
Exactly, 8429. But tractors, even the slow-moving ones, are designed to haul, push, or pull other equipment like trailers or farm implements over the ground. That function as a prime mover is what Section X captures. It's the distinction between a machine that transports and a machine that works. And the tractor, despite its working implements, is fundamentally defined as a machine that transports those implements.
There's a crucial legal nuance, the movement and the pulling capacity. That is the defining legal feature.
It is.
Okay, moving to something smaller and electrified. Electric bicycles, HS code 8711 port 600. These things are defined by their battery, their motor, their controller. They're fundamentally electrical mechanisms that assist human effort. So why wouldn't they fall into Section X for electrical equipment, Chapter 85?
Because of the principle we just established. Function so often overrides material and complexity. The expectation is Section 6 sure, but the reality is Section 7 for vehicles under HS code 8711.60.
And what does that code say?
The code specifically recognizes them as cycles with an auxiliary motor, electric motor power not exceeding 1,000 watts. It's very specific.
So the classification is based on the item being a bicycle first, even though the electrical component is what makes it modern and valuable.
Yeah.
How does GRI 3B essential character apply here? I mean, since the electric motor provides the defining technological advantage.
It's a classic GRI 3B test, but the essential character is determined by the overall structure and its intended use. The product retains the fundamental characteristic of a bicycle. It has pedals, seating for 1 or 2 people. It's steered manually.
Right.
The electric motor is auxiliary. It assists the human effort required for transportation. It doesn't completely replace it like, say, a moped or a motorcycle might. Customs views the frame, the wheels, and the seating as contributing the essential character of personal transport, and that overrides the electrical propulsion system.
So if you try to classify it under Chapter 85,
The auditor would immediately apply GRI 3B and argue the principal function is vehicle transport, not energy conversion. It's a non-starter.
that makes perfect sense. The end-use functionality triumphs. Now for a real curveball. Prefabricated buildings, HS code 9406.90. I'm expecting Section 6 for chemical or allied industries, or maybe Section XV for metals, depending on the wall structure. Why do these enormous stationary structures land in the machinery section? It seems completely illogical.
It is arguably one of the most counterintuitive placements in the entire HS system, and it demands that you pay attention to the legal structuring. The actual classification is Section X lace machinery and mechanical appliances, electrical covers complete or prefabricated constructions.
But Section 16 is titled for machinery. How can a finished stationary building unit possibly be considered machinery?
This is a critical example of how the section notes can expand the scope far beyond the literal title. Section 16 is complex. It contains Chapter 84 for machinery and Chapter 85 for electrical equipment. But Chapter 94, which covers furniture, lighting, and specifically prefabricated buildings, is placed here because the HS system needed a place for complex, finished, manufactured articles that are not specified anywhere else.
Especially those that require specialized assembly or installation.
Exactly. So you can think of Chapter 94 as a sort of residual category for certain manufactured goods that override the normal material classification.
I see.
The classification is based on the building's status as a complete manufactured structure that is ready for assembly. GRI 2A applies here, the rule for incomplete articles that have the essential character of the whole. The WCO intended to classify these structures as a single unit, avoiding the nightmare of classifying hundreds of individual components based on wood, steel, glass, and insulation.
So Chapter 94 provides that legal umbrella.
It does. When Customs sees an import manifest for, say, flat-packed components designed to snap together into a complete structure, they look to Chapter 94. And that completely supersedes the material rules. If an importer classifies based on the raw materials, say Section 6 for the plastics or Section XV for the metal, they're failing to apply GRI 2A and GRI 1.
That structural placement is key. You're not classifying the components, you're classifying the finished article, and the legal framework mandates that the finished article belongs in Chapter 94, which itself is contained under Section 17, a classic example of the necessity of reading the fine print.
You have to read the fine print.
Let's move to modern high-tech goods, where convergence means everything does everything, blurring the lines between communication, computing, and precision measurement. We'll start with the smartphone, HS code 851-69512. My expectation is Section 8. Precision, measuring, medical instruments, because of the advanced sensory capabilities, the extreme high-resolution imaging, GPS, atmospheric pressure sensors. It's a precision tool in your pocket.
And that's the trap. Focusing on the secondary functions. The actual classification is firmly in Section X6I machinery and electrical equipment under HS code 8517.12.
Okay, so what is the definitive legal argument that keeps it out of Chapter 90 for precision instruments, or even Chapter 84 for data processing?
This is a pure application of GRI 3B, classification by essential character. Customs auditors are trained to ignore ancillary features. For a smartphone, the essential character is defined in Chapter 85, which covers electrical machinery and equipment.
And specifically?
Specifically, heading 8517 covers telephone sets, including telephones for cellular networks or for other wireless networks. The camera, the GPS, the computing power, which you're right, could place it under 8471, ADP machines, they're all considered secondary or ancillary.
So the core function is just making calls and using data.
The ability to send and receive voice and data wirelessly is the commercial driver and the defining feature. If you attempt to declare this under a different chapter, say 9006 for a camera, Customs will immediately apply GRI 3B and override that declaration because the commutation functionality contributes far more significantly to the utility and value of the article than the camera function.
The moment you activate that device, its primary function, as defined by the WCO, is communication. That's a very clear line.
Very clear.
This leads us to dedicated GPS devices, HS code 8526.91. Here, the expectation is certainly Section 8 under 9015 surveying instruments. It measures location with incredible precision. Why is this wrong?
Because the how matters immensely more than the what. While the purpose is location measurement, the classification is Section X66 for electrical equipment under HS code 8526.91.
And what does that code cover?
That code specifically includes radar apparatus, radio navigational aid apparatus.
That word radio seems to be doing a lot of heavy lifting here. How does that single technical method dictate the entire section placement?
It's fundamental. A GPS device functions by receiving and processing complex radio signals broadcast from satellites to calculate its position. It is inherently an electrical device for radio navigation.
I see.
Chapter 90, for precision instruments, often contains legal notes that explicitly exclude radio or electronic navigational aids. For instance, Chapter Note 1E to Chapter 90 typically excludes electrical machinery or equipment of Chapter 85.
So the note itself kicks it out.
It kicks it out. The GPS is a piece of Chapter 85 equipment that processes radio signals whose output just happens to be information about location. It's not a passive physical surveying instrument like a level or a transit, which belong in 9015.
So if an importer mistakenly declares a GPS device under 9045, maybe because the duty rate is lower or they just misunderstood the category, what is the auditor's immediate move?
The auditor immediately cites the relevant chapter note exclusion. I've seen this happen countless times. An importer argued that a high-precision GPS was a surveying instrument. The auditor simply pointed to the legal text of Chapter 90, which excludes radio navigational aids. End of dispute. Wow.
The classification is rooted in the signal processing technology, not the end result of the location data. This just highlights Rule 2. You have to always read the exclusions in the chapter notes.
All right. This next segment tackles products where the physical material or occurrence is just completely misleading. Let's start with solar panels. HS code 8541.40. Visually, I see a huge sheet of glass, an aluminum frame, and some silicon. My expectation is Section 13 for articles of stone, glassware, etc. The material just dominates the perception.
And that visual perception leads directly to misclassification. The classification entirely disregards the structural materials, the glass and the frame, and it prioritizes the specific electrical function. They are classified under Section 2006 for machinery and electrical equipment under HS Code 8541.40.
Why that specific code? That's where you find electronic components, right?
Right. 8541.40 covers photosensitive semiconductor devices, including photovoltaic cells, whether or not assembled in modules or made up into panels. They are recognized legally as active energy conversion devices.
So the glass and aluminum are just housing. They're merely protective or structural housing. The heart of the product, the photovoltaic cell, is an electrical component designed to convert light energy into electrical energy. Any attempt to classify them based on the glass or aluminum materials fails GRI 3B, the essential character rule, because the electrical generation function provides the panel's primary purpose and its value.
A clear principle emerges. If it converts one form of energy into electrical energy, it's highly likely to land in Chapter 85, regardless of its shell.
Exactly. Which brings us to LED lights. These also fall under HS Code 8541.40. My initial intuitive mistake here would be Section 6 for chemical or allied industries. I mean, the core of an LED is a semiconductor diode, which requires complex, high-purity chemical manufacturing processes.
So we're looking at another case where the material science origin is irrelevant compared to the electrical application.
Precisely. Like solar panels, the classification ignores the composition, the semiconductor materials, and the chemical purity, and it focuses purely on the ultimate electrical application, which is emitting light. They are classified in Section Exit 6, HS Code 8541.40, because they are fundamentally active electrical devices that emit light through semiconductor technology.
So it solidifies the principle.
It does. Active electrical components that convert energy are almost always in Chapter 85.
That is a very clear and powerful classification principle. Now, let's pivot sharply to a product that seems chemically defined but isn't. Fire extinguishers, HS Code 8424.10. The common expectation is Section 6, chemical or allied industries, because the chemical agent, the powder, the foam, the gas, is the essential reason for the product's existence.
This is perhaps one of the most frequently challenged classifications in audits. The HS system draws a hard legal line between the chemical agent and the apparatus used to deploy it. The actual classification is Section 666 for machinery, specifically under HS Code 8424.10.
And what does that cover?
Chapter 8424 covers mechanical appliances, whether or not hand-operated, for projecting, dispersing, or spraying liquids or powders.
So the customs officer looks at the finished product and classifies the cylinder, the nozzle, the valve, the handle, the entire mechanical device as an apparatus for spraying, and they completely ignore the chemical contained within.
Correct. The classification focuses on the mechanical nature of the container and the discharge mechanism. The chemical agent is considered merely the necessary medium for the apparatus to function.
But if you import the chemicals separately,
If you import the chemical content separately in bulk containers, they would go into a chemical chapter 28 or 38. But the finished charged extinguisher is classified based on its mechanical function of projecting a substance.
that's a fantastic audit challenge scenario. If I'm defending an audit, how does the auditor distinguish between a charged extinguisher under 8424.10 and, say, an uncharged empty cylinder ready for filling? Wouldn't it just be a metal vessel from Section XE?
That's where GRI 2A comes in, the rule for incomplete or unfinished articles. An empty extinguisher cylinder, complete with its valve and nozzle, has the essential character of the finished mechanical appliance.
I see.
The lack of chemical charge is considered irrelevant, as the product is clearly designed for its specialized use as a projector apparatus. Customs treats it as a substantially complete 8424 appliance, regardless of the temporary absence of the filling.
This is a critical point. The classification is locked in by the design of the mechanical parts.
That really demonstrates how systematic the HS framework is. It forces you to choose the mechanical character over the chemical purpose.
It does.
Our final item in this section is the 3D printer, HS Code 8477.80. Given that plastic filament is the dominant material used, the expectation is often Section 7, plastics and articles thereof, grouped with other plastic goods.
And again, the importer is focusing on the output material rather than the process. The actual classification is Section X6 for machinery and electrical equipment under HS Code 8477.80.
What does 8477.80 cover that captures a 3D printer? It's defined as machines for working rubber or plastics, or for the manufacture of products from these materials. A 3D printer is not an article of plastic. It is a highly specialized machine designed to process plastics, typically through extrusion, layering, and additive manufacturing. Its function is manufacturing, prototyping, and tooling a mechanical process.
So if an importer uses the wrong code, say one in Section 7, what specific piece of evidence does the auditor rely on to reclassify it as 88477.80?
The auditor relies on the manufacturer's own documentation and the operational manual. I recall an audit case where an importer classified hundreds of industrial 3D printers incorrectly under a general machinery code. The auditor simply pulled the machine's spec sheet.
And what did it say?
It invariably described the product as a polymer processing machine or an additive manufacturing machine tool, confirming its role in Chapter 84. The distinction is clear. Section 7 is for the plastic itself, or finished plastic goods. Chapter 84 is for the machine that makes those goods.
We've established that Section X16 is the default for complex machines. But now we look at two items where Chapter 90, the precision and medical section, creates a specific mandatory exception that overrides the machinery section. First, large medical devices like MRI machines, HS code 9013.13. These are massive, complex systems with powerful electromagnets, elaborate cooling systems. Surely they should be classified as general machinery under 8479.
They absolutely meet the description of general machinery, but this is the ultimate test case for Rule 2. Read the legal notes. The actual classification is Section X8 for precision, measuring, medical or surgical instruments under HS code 9011.13.
What's the specific wording?
It's specifically for magnetic resonance imaging apparatus.
So where's the legal wall that prevents them from being classified as general machinery in Section X16?
The legal wall is Chapter Note 1C to Section TED 6. This note explicitly states that Section 16 does not cover articles of Chapter 90, 91, or 92, which are scientific, measuring, and medical instruments, clocks, and musical instruments.
It's a clear legal exclusion.
It's an application of GRI 1. The moment the WCO decides that an MRI machine belongs specifically in Chapter 90 due to its dedicated use in medical diagnostics, it is legally mandated to be excluded from Section X6 Inc., regardless of its complexity or its mechanical components.
So the specific purpose medical diagnosis is the legal trigger that pulls the entire machine out of the general machinery basket, even if, say, 90% of its internal components would individually be classified in Section 16.
That is precisely the point. The specific dedication to medical use overrides the general description as machinery. The WCO prioritizes the grouping of diagnostic instruments together, regardless of their size or mechanical sophistication. It provides consistency for customs globally.
And this principle is mirrored in our final item. Eyeglasses, HS code 9004.10. I might expect Section 6 due to the advanced composite lens materials and chemical coatings. Why are they so firmly in Chapter 90?
Because of their undisputed function as optical instruments for correcting vision, they fall under Section 8, precision, measuring, medical, or surgical instruments under HS code 904.10.
Is this another application of the essential character rule, GRI 3B?
Absolutely. The classification is determined strictly by the optical function. The fact that the frame is plastic or the lens is a specialized polymer is irrelevant. The core purpose of the article is optical correction. Chapter 90 is reserved for instruments and apparatus relating to optics. The defining feature is the lens, making them a precision instrument, thus mandating their inclusion under 9004.10, and that overrides any material classification rule.
That completes our tour of the 11 most confused codes. The pattern is stark. The common mistake is always prioritizing visual or material intuition over the systematic legal framework defined by function and the general rules of interpretation.
We've established that getting these 11 codes wrong is easy, but we need to pivot now to the operational reality. An incorrect HS code classification impacts far more than just the immediate duty rate for one container. It creates a systemic compliance risk across the entire enterprise.
It's the definition of a compliance domino effect. Let's start with the most obvious impact: duty and VAT.
Right. Misclassification invariably leads to duties that are either too high or too low. Overpaying duties means you're hemorrhaging capital unnecessarily. But underpaying creates a massive long-term liability.
Give me an example.
If you mistakenly classify a high-value item like a specialized MRI component under a general 0% machinery code when it's correct, more specific, Chapter 90 code carries an 8% tariff, you are instantly liable for that 8% differential on every single shipment.
And that liability is compounded by the second, more dangerous domino: licensing and regulations.
Precisely. The HS code is the gateway to the regulatory regime. Many codes trigger crucial non-tariff barriers, Licensing requirements, safety certifications like CE or UL or trade quotas.
Like the GPS example.
Exactly. Take our GPS device example, 8526.91. This code, because it defines the item as radio navigational aid apparatus, is often scrutinized under dual-use technology regulations or export control lists. If an importer classifies it incorrectly under 9015 for surveying instruments, they are effectively bypassing the mandatory export control checks and licensing requirements tied to that 8526 code.
So a technical classification mistake transforms into a failure to adhere to international security and trade laws, which can carry severe corporate and sometimes even criminal penalties.
Exactly. The compliance failure is catastrophic. You might be compliant with your duty rates, but you're non-compliant with security controls, all because of an incorrect 3-digit classification.
Let's detail the real-world consequences of this when customs actually flags an issue. What happens during an audit? What does that look like?
Okay, first, there is reclassification. The customs authority, backed by their internal legal team, determines the correct legally defensible code. And this determination is rarely subjective. It relies on the same legal notes and GRIs we've been discussing.
And if there's a dispute?
Well, importantly, if there is a dispute, the classification often defaults to the specific code with the higher duty rate, as that is the safest legal position for the government.
And then the clock starts ticking backwards.
Yes. The worst consequence is the issuance of retroactive duty bills. Customs authorities have the legal right to review past imports, usually 3 to 5 years, sometimes even more. If they find you consistently misclassified your products, for instance, classifying those fire extinguishers under the chemical section instead of 824.10, they will issue a bill for all the underpaid duties and the associated interest for that entire period.
That sounds devastating.
This liability can easily run into the millions, and it can sink mid-sized companies.
And beyond the financial hit, what is the immediate operational impact on current imports, the stuff that's on the water right now?
That is the daily nightmare. Inspections and delays. Once your company or a specific product line is flagged for misclassification or non-compliance, your shipments are automatically flagged as high risk.
So they stop moving.
They stop moving. They are subject to lengthy physical inspections at the port, sometimes destructive or invasive exams. This leads to demurrage charges, missed delivery windows, penalties from your clients, and just catastrophic supply chain interruptions. The theoretical classification dispute suddenly manifests as a container sitting on a dock costing you tens of thousands of dollars per day.
So classification expertise is not an academic pursuit. It is fundamental risk mitigation necessary to keep the lights on and the supply chain moving.
Absolutely.
We've seen the damage caused by relying on intuition. Now we need to synthesize the knowledge gained from these 11 complex products into an actionable strategy for professionals. If we had to distill the classification process into a checklist, what is Rule 1 derived from our deep dive?
Rule 1. Always prioritize function and the essential character. When you're faced with a complex or multi-function item like a smartphone, a tractor, or a solar panel, you must apply GRI 3B. You have to determine the primary defining commercial use. The question is, what is this item fundamentally designed and sold to do?
And you ignore the other stuff.
You ignore the complex mechanical elements or the material composition if a singular, higher function like transport, communication, medical diagnosis defines its purpose. That primary function is your legal classification hook.
And since we saw the MRI machine and the GPS device classification dictated by legal exclusions, what is Rule 2?
Rule 2. Read and apply the legal notes. This is GRI 1. Never rely solely on product descriptions or the title of a chapter. Classification must begin by consulting the section and chapter notes. These notes contain crucial, legally binding exclusions and inclusions. They are the absolute legal authority.
Like with the MRI machine.
The MRI machine story teaches us that a machine that looks like it belongs in Chapter 84 is legally excluded by a note in Section X66, and that overrides all other logical attempts. You must consult the notes to establish the legal boundaries of every classification bucket.
The reliance on intuition often stems from ease. People want to type a product name into a search bar and get the answer. But we've seen that this leads directly to the 11 mistakes we just discussed. What is the danger of keyword reliance in a professional context?
The danger is systemic misclassification. Keyword searches and simple databases give you a suggestion based on correlation, but they fundamentally ignore the legal structure. If you search for high-tech precision glass for a solar panel, you get Section 13. If you search surveying tool for a GPS, you get Chapter 90.
Right.
The keyword classification process bypasses the necessary legal sequence. GRI 1, the notes, followed by GRI 3B, essential character, An auditor doesn't care what your search engine says. They care about what the WCO legal text dictates. Relying on keywords leads to a guess, and a guess is legally indefensible.
So how does a professional move away from guesswork toward systematic, legally defensible classification? They need a guide through this decision matrix.
The modern customs professional needs systematic tools designed to guide them through the established legal classification logic, mirroring the decision framework used by auditors. This is where advanced resources really come into play.
So something more than just a search bar.
Exactly. I mean, tools like hcodefiner.ai, for instance, are designed not just to provide a single code result, but to force the user to interact with the underlying legal structure. They prompt you to check section notes, apply the GRIs, and document your justification.
Ah, so it shifts the process.
It shifts the process from what is the answer to what is the legal justification for this answer, and that justification is the only thing that stands up in an audit.
That shift in mindset from code lookup to legal justification is the key to systematic risk reduction. Beyond using smarter tools and training, what is the highest level of systematic risk reduction a professional can adopt when classification is genuinely ambiguous, perhaps due to technological novelty?
The gold standard for ambiguous products is seeking a binding ruling from the customs authorities in the country of importation. This is a formal application process where you present your product, its components, and your proposed classification logic. Customs reviews it and issues an official written ruling.
A legally binding document.
A legally binding document that dictates the correct classification code for your specific product. While it requires time and detailed effort, a binding ruling completely immunizes you from retroactive penalties and classification disputes on that product moving forward. It is the ultimate proactive measure for high-risk, high-volume, or newly invented goods.
So you invest the time up front to secure legal certainty rather than waiting years for an auditor to expose your liability.
That's the smart move.
So, to summarize our entire conversation.
The core message is this. HS classification is fundamentally a legal interpretation exercise. You're applying the WCO rules, notes, and headings. It is not a product naming or simple descriptive exercise. The moment you understand that the customs officer is interpreting the legal text, not the marketing copy on your website, you change your entire approach.
Right.
The fact that a product is complex, like the tractor, or chemically advanced, like the LED, is irrelevant if a higher legal principle, like its essential function as a vehicle or a medical instrument, dictates a different placement.
These 11 examples prove that the human tendency is to classify based on what seems most dominant. The glass in the solar panel, the complexity of the MRI, and the legal framework consistently corrects that intuition by prioritizing function and the specific written notes and exclusions.
The classification is locked in by the most essential element of the product, often defined by the general rules of interpretation. If you can anticipate the functional hierarchy and apply the GRIs, you can minimize your risk exposure significantly.
So what does this all mean for the perpetual challenge of modern trade? We are constantly seeing the convergence of technology. Think about our electric bicycle. What if a manufacturer updates that bike to include a dozen sophisticated biometric sensors, a real-time medical monitoring system, and the marketing is centered on cardiac health and physiological data transmission? And suddenly that data transmission capability is 90% of its value. Will its essential character change?
That is the perpetual adaptation required of compliance professionals. If the market and technology shift the essential character of that product from transport in Section 7 CIF to, say, medical monitoring and data processing in Section 8 or Chapter 85, its classification must change.
Because the codes lag behind reality.
The codes lag behind reality. You must constantly reevaluate even established products based on technological evolution and the changing weight of their functions.
Review your codes critically, prioritize function, rely on the legal notes, and assume the most specific code is the correct one. That's the real deep dive. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.